Everybody, and welcome to our November 2025 astrology forecast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by astrologer Chelsea Collins. So, thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. And how are you doing today?
I'm good. Nice to see you. Glad to be able to do the forecast with you.
Thank you so much again for joining us. Okay, Chelsea, before we get into the details of each week for November, what is your sense as an overview for the month of November?
Well, I think that with the sun being in Scorpio, really highlighting water elements, this month is really totally the story of water, I think. We have Jupiter in Cancer, we have Saturn in Pisces, with Neptune now finally ingressing back in, and then Mars also still in Scorpio. So I think that we're going to be dealing with a lot of water, energy, water trines, and there'll be different players at that trine table, if you will, throughout the month. But that Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter story, I think, will always be a bit of the backdrop since those move the slowest in this process.
It's such a wonderful point, and the water component is very prominent this month. So I almost get a sense that if for some of you out there, if you're feeling like you're on the white water rapids, I think my advice would just be to go with the flow and not try and fight
Hmm.
against the currents. I'd certainly avoid any people in your life that are, like emotional vampires, especially with all this water around. But I think this is a month where, this is a great time to slow down and take stock. For the most part of this month, we're going to have half of our planets retrograde, retracing their steps. And the advantage with this is a great time of the year to take stock of how 2025 has been for you, how it's treated you. And this is a great month to revise your plans for the future. We're going to have Mercury retrograde. It's also a great time to revise the structures in your life, thinking about where parts of your life that may need restructuring. But also with the Jupiter retrograde, which we'll get to, we can also look at parts of our life where maybe we need to expand our horizons moving forward, or parts of our life where we need to rein in from excess. So this is the general feel I get for November. Great time just to slow down, to take stock of the year so far, and maybe not try and push too far ahead. Okay, so getting into the specifics of each week, Chelsea, what are your thoughts for the first week of November?
Well, I think, to your point on what you talked about really for the whole month is that in an ironic way, Mars is actually going to be helpful with that because it's in its home sign of Scorpio, and it's a lot more strategic in the way it operates, and a little bit more contemplative. And so, if the idea here is that we need to kind of rein in maybe what we've expanded or revise some of our plans, or we actually have setbacks in our life that cause us to take stock maybe emotionally about something or relationship wise, Mars is really good here in being able to help us sort through that in a lot more of a careful, contemplative way. So I think that will be a benefit. I don't often say that as much about Mars, but I think it's a truly proactive, productive version of the planet at this point, especially because it's in a trine relationship with that exalted Jupiter and Saturn, even though it doesn't have a lot of dignity in Scorpio, it has a lot of help being, more proactive in the process. So I think that that's interesting that the month opens up though with the a ton of people also needing to get creative and how they're being fed, with SNAP benefits expiring this month, as well as healthcare premiums changing within the United States, and how the government really, in that Saturn Neptune nebulous way, is not able to really come together and, open the government up. So the people are left in trying to get creative, with, helping each other out, and maybe having to lend a helping hand. That Jupiter in Cancer and that Mars in Scorpio will be more proactive in helping each other try and work through that unfortunate situation.
It's a great point, Chelsea. And actually, we've got it wrong on here. I believe the Venus opposite Chiron is going to be on the 2nd November, but it speaks to that point on the mundane level, especially here in the United States. We've got this Venus, we've got this Chiron, we've got this wounded sense of, finances, Venus. How are people going to be able to stretch their budgets? and how do 40 million people survive without access to nutrition. So I think that's going to be a story we're going to hear as we go through this week. But switching gears, I think the first week in November is a tale of two halves. I mean, apart from the Venus opposite Chiron picture, this might be quite a nice weekend. November 2nd on a Sunday, we've got the two benefics seeing one another. They're both fairly dignified. So this is a great time to
Yep.
go out and enjoy yourself, if you have the means to, of course, to go out and enjoy yourself, have some fun, maybe have a gathering or a party. But the caution here with the square aspect is maybe not overdo things. Maybe don't take too much sugar intake or go overboard. If you've got leftover candy from Halloween, this
Yes.
may be a caution for that point. And as we get to November 3rd, we've got this, creative connection. We've got Mars, and we can have that Neptune connection of creativity. Now, the reason why it might get a bit turbulent and enjoy the first part of the week in November is that as we get to the middle of the week, we start to get a bit more turbulent. We've got that Mars entering mutable fire. It's an outward polarity, but then we have this opposition to Uranus. Now, what I always talk about with this opposition is just be careful on the roads. If you're going out, going to work, be careful of putting, speeding. Watch out for, you might see more sudden accidents that's happening around your local environment. And I think this is emphasized by the Taurus full moon coming up on November 5th, because the energy of the skies is building for this full moon energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people, you can kind of get the sense that maybe there is some sort of a breaking point in not taking action and needing to actually do something. And then Mars changing signs and going into the sign of Sagittarius that is, all about movement and actually taking action and advocacy. Opposite Uranus is a good combination and for, people just finally needing to do something. And so that in the positive sense, it could just be that finally you get the momentum to have to take action. But yes, in a very cautious way. I think the gift of astrology is all about awareness, and knowing what's going on can also help us temper maybe the way in which we take action in the future.
Wonderful points. And as we get to November 6th and 7th, Venus is going to be losing her dignity and going into fixed water, into Scorpio. And then to compound issues, that Venus is going to square off against Pluto. So on more of an individual level, this could bring, a bit more intensity into our interpersonal relationships. Things might be unearthed. So, be careful of those relationships,
Hmm.
what you might say. And maybe more on a mundane level, this could tie in with financial markets. I know it's been up and down through the year. So whether these dumbass tariffs keep kicking in, and then there's more. I know they're trying to work things out with China, but still in the global markets, if the mundane sense of Venus is finances, I wonder if there might be some turbulence there as we get to the latter half of the first week of November.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I know, astrologically speaking, some of these eclipses that are happening on the Virgo Pisces axis in the past have been indicative of changes in the financial markets. So it'll be interesting to see if, any of that comes to fruition as well.
Chelsea, moving into week two, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the Mercury retrograde is definitely something to pay attention to, as it's making contact with that newly ingressed Mars. Something about, again, Mars kind of being in Scorpio, you know, always is like the ultimate investigator. It works behind the scenes. It's great for people wanting to do research or dive into something, but it also could be indicative of something that maybe has been kind of been going on behind the scenes, that now in Sag, in conjunction with Mercury stationing, is like, wait a second, this actually happened. This is something that's coming to light. This can happen in our individual lives, that we become aware of, especially with the Uranus aspect to it, being in the sign of Mercury. And so again, maybe new information, new light in a certain aspect of our lives, or in just even the greater picture of the public, and something coming to our awareness that we weren't aware of before, that we then need to reconsider and take different courses of action. And
Absolutely, great point. And it's a double whammy for Mercury November 9th. Not only have we gone into our detriment here, we're stationing to go retrograde. So some of the feelings I've got here is there may be some issues with miscommunication. So just be careful in terms of your contacts, whether that's co-workers, bosses. I'd also say this might be a time just to, especially with Venus in a detriment and Jupiter stationed to go retrograde the next day, I'd probably avoid signing any contracts at this point. I know that can be quite cliche, but still it's the case with all of these planets turning inward. I would certainly, again, avoid signing any major contracts, making any major purchases at this time, just with the dignities of the planet, and maybe wait a period of time, if you've got any important matters that are coming up. And as we get to November 12th, we've got that Mercury retrograding conjunct Mars. Now, this connection, you can talk about those be fighting words. So again, not only miscommunication, there could be quite, upheavals in our communications, whether it's with our interpersonal relationships, whether it's co-workers or bosses. Just be mindful of what you're saying at this time, because with mutable fire, it's an outward polarity, and people are less likely to keep their mouths shut and say what's on their mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think though it's also important to note too, though, that on the 10th there's that Moon Jupiter conjunction in Cancer, and so that is actually might be a bit of a mitigating factor in this situation, because it'll just be interesting to see at that point what goes on with the government, what goes on with the SNAP benefits that happened at the beginning of the month. If at some point this Moon Jupiter conjunction might offer a bit of a reprieve from that, with Jupiter being exalted in Cancer and and its ruler co-present with it. I'm just kind of curious to see that now that the moon at the beginning of the month was in Pisces with that Saturn Neptune, now that it's meeting that Jupiter, this is again that kind of water trine where people are kind of shifting at the table, and the moon is no longer sitting with Saturn, but it's also now sitting with Jupiter. And so I feel like that energy shift might be more beneficial and positive, even though we do have a lot of these stationary retrograde planets, especially not in the best dignity. That Moon Jupiter conjunction is something worth paying attention to in everybody's lives. So, pertaining to, home, family, relationships, again, how we have our needs met is also something that will be something to earmark for the 10th.
Point. And going back to what you're saying on more of a mundane level, of course, the United States government is shut right now. So I have a sense that if this has not worked out and the impasse hasn't been broken before we get to November 9th, I would imagine it'd probably take to the end of the month. And I think they'll break the record. I don't know what the record is for keeping the government shut, but
Right.
I don't think unless they sort it out before November 9th, I've just got the sense that it's probably going to take to Mercury going direct at the end of the month before there may be some resolutions. So we could be seeing a prolonged shutdown. And of course, that's just going to exacerbate the issues we've been talking about with people being taken off food assistance, with people being furloughed, whether it's airport workers not getting paid or air traffic controllers. That's very dangerous. So I just get this sense if it's not worked out by the 9th, I think it might carry on to the end of the month. But I could be wrong, but it'd be interesting to find out as we go through.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to see as time goes on how that ends up working out for sure.
Okay, into week three. But before we get to week three, I think we'll be remiss because we totally forgot to talk about Uranus going back into Taurus. So let's talk about that briefly. Your thoughts on that, Chelsea?
Yeah, I think that really the sun now starts to play an aspect to Taurus or to Uranus and Taurus. So anything that we dealt with Uranus and Taurus before, anything that's changeable in our lives from the tangible perspective, from anything we can see, taste, feel, touch, smell. Anything that we can physically interact with is again up for revision, and sudden changes again. That last degree of Taurus is pretty powerful, and the sun shining some light on that, in Scorpio, and that opposition really does highlight like, do we really need this thing? Do we really want this thing? Do we need to let this thing go? Is this available to us anymore? It's been a long 8 years in Taurus. Uranus traditionally doesn't do so well within that fixed Earth sign. And then having the sun there in opposition to it might just really emphasize that piece of, what do we need to hold on to and what really has to go no matter what. I think that fixed axis really does like to hold, and Uranus is not one to allow us to do that super often. So yeah, that aspect I think is pretty strong.
It's a great point about the modalities and the fixivity on how Uranus will, the signs will struggle, especially with fixed Earth. So whether we'll see, on a mundane sense, will it, literally apply to the Earth? Will it be supply issues or trade? Will it be, could it literally be earthquakes, things of this nature? It's a bit cliche to say this at this
Mm.
point, but again, you can expect the unexpected with Uranus. I don't think it will quite go back to the degree of Algol, but it's certainly going to be working its way back closer to that
Hmm.
point. So that's going to be quite interesting, especially, Sun is quite active right now if we're talking about leaders worldwide. So maybe keeping an eye
Yep.
out for that. That might be a component. But yeah, sorry, Chelsea, I forgot to talk about a big part of that, which was Uranus go back into Taurus. So let's
Yeah,
get
for
into the
sure.
details of week 3.
All right. Yeah, so here again, the water trine is just always going to keep coming back up here with the sun now involved with the Saturn Jupiter situation. And so maybe shining light in a solution-based aspect. Jupiter station retrograde, it's still exact with Saturn, and the sun kind of coming into that, really kind of having highlighting all of this again. The sun, can indicate leaders, like you said, Callum, but it also in our personal lives, it's just our identity and ourself and who we are in relation to this process. So I think that individually, that water trine, might give the sun might shed some light and some help in that situation. But we'll have to see.
Great points. And I think as we move on to November 18th, we're going to have Mercury retrograding back into Scorpio. So on a more individual level, if we've maybe blurted things out where that Mercury was in the fire, that mutable fire sign, maybe time to again go back with that inner polarity and think about what is being said over that period of time. Retrogrades are always going back and revising and revisiting, and especially with Mercury involved as well. I always say with Mercury in Scorpio, it's always a great, whether it's natally for investigational journalism. So I can't help but sense as we have that Mercury November 19th in the opposition to Uranus, whether on the collective we hear some unexpected news, something that comes out from the ground, whether that's to do with things like the Epstein files, things of this nature. You can always, again, expect the unexpected with Uranus. I wonder if there's something that comes back around, or maybe we'll have to wait for that Mercury to go direct to get the full picture. That might be interesting as we go through. And of course, we're going to have the Scorpio new moon. So, like with any new moon, this is always a great time to set your intentions. That Mars is going to be a part of that because it's Mars ruled. And then we're going to have the Mercury cazimi as well, which is going to help with communications, whoever we're speaking to, whether it's on an individual level or it might help in the collective as well.
Well, and I think to your point too, on the 16th, the moon will have, is obviously left its conjunction with Jupiter, and then it's also hitting that square to Pluto, and on its way to that new moon situation. So the moon itself actually might be a catalyst to that, what you were saying, Callum, where you've got some news of something of a Jupiterian effect, then passing the message through to the sun and to the Venus. This Venus rules that. So that Epstein file situation might be indicative of that with Pluto squaring the moon on its way to that new moon situation. So yeah, a lot of like I just feel like overall the moon really is the messenger this month when it comes to the relationship with all the planets that end up in water trine. It kind of has a seat at everybody's next to everybody at the table. And I think that the moon's position as the month goes will be fascinating to watch and see if it really does translate from one aspect to another and how that all works together, especially with Mercury going retrograde. But anyway, that's just kind of an overall thought that I have. It just pay attention to the lunar cycle this month is pretty fascinating.
A wonderful point, Chelsea. Absolutely. So as we move to November 20th, it's not usually a great big a deal when you have the outer planets in the connections, but both the Uranus and Neptune are retrograde back in the inward polarity signs. We've just got a taste now of some of the planets in the outward polarity signs with the Neptune when it was in Aries and the Uranus in Gemini. So this is going to be a pull back to the previous signs where we may have to revisit collectively what's going on. Because at this point, I don't know as a species, we know where we're going or what we're doing, but this might be just an interesting connection to go back over old ground. But then, more in an immediate sense, as we get to November 21st, we're going to have Sun going into Sagittarius season. So, as we get deeper into the month, as we've talked about, Chelsea, we've had a very watery month, but we're going to start having more planets move into a fire signs. And of course, that's going to have a very different dynamic, both on an individual level and in the collective as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, going back to that Scorpio new moon here, it's also interesting because Mercury is also cazimi that at the same time. So you've got the Sun, Moon, Mercury all at the same degree opposing Uranus. So again, it's really hard to escape these late degree water uh, planets. I mean, they're just really going to set the tone for what's to begin. And if this is going to be the start of the new lunar cycle, it's going to be a pretty powerful one. I think it's going to be very impactful for the majority of us on a collective level, just because the moon is in fall in Scorpio. But I do feel like having Mercury retrograde there, there's something news wise or information wise that we're going to have to be dealing with. And again, I think moving from that fixed water to the mutable fire of Sagittarius, where activism is a thing and really people seeking justice and calling out injustice. And Scorpio is also about, finding the real true nature of something. And then I feel like the way Sagittarius modifies that is it brings it out into the open for discussion, whether people like it or not. And so I think then, with the sun then being co-present with Mars in this situation, the sun gains a lot of dignity in a fire sign. And so it'll be interesting to see again, what are people going to do with whatever goes on at the beginning of the month, whatever situations, whatever information, whatever scenarios they find themselves in, and how they're going to take action towards the end now that everything is going from water into fire, the outcomes of that or the way in which we deal with things together is going to be interesting in the nature of Sagittarius.
Absolutely great points. And as we get to the end of the week, we're having more Mercury connections. Mercury's very busy this month. We've got the trine to the Saturn and the trine to the Jupiter. So thinking collectively, it's almost like we're living now in a post-truth society. Not only are many people siloed in their own media bubbles, but we've got to this point where the facts don't matter anymore. So whether we can talk about, I know at this point Mercury's back into Scorpio, but Mercury in her detriment, and then we've got the South Node in Virgo. It's almost like the facts don't matter anymore in a post-truth society. And this is going to be the problem because how can any society work where there's no agreement on a collective sense of what the facts are? And I think this is just going to be another theme that permeates not only through this month, but for the years to come with the outer planets as well.
For sure. And again, it just kind of feels like breaking point, where people have just had enough. We can do that collectively. We can do that individually, in relationship one-on-one or with the people that we're closest to or work situations, markets, all of that stuff. With Uranus having that last final hit in Taurus, it's real, it's tangible. It's not something that's theoretical, I don't think anymore. And people are going to have to actually do something or feel the compelled to actually take some action after finally, feeling maybe powerless for a while, maybe feeling more empowered once the sun and Mars are there, really getting motivated, especially with Jupiter still being, it might be retrograde, but it's still in Cancer. It still provides a means to take action.
I think that's such a wonderful point talking about, feeling powerless, because I think as a collective, many of us have felt powerless, but trying to find that empowerment again is going to be such an important point moving forward because we need to move on as a society. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, into week 4, Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, so the we've got Sun, Mars, and Sagittarius, and now all of that is squaring Saturn and Neptune, and so you've got two mutable stelliums, or a lot of planetary focus, I guess I should say, not really stelliums, but you've got the node there too with Saturn and Neptune. But it's kind of more like the struggle between tangible action and what's right for everyone, and not everybody might be able to take action, and so it might take people more in a position of leadership or control or power from the positive in order to help the collective coming through. It might take people that we view as heroic, so to speak, really coming through and finally showing up and taking action for the majority of the people that might feel, the might be that Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces person. So you help someone that can't help themselves, and then that helps everyone, is kind of what I'm feeling. I don't know. What do you think?
Wonderful points. I was actually honing in on November 24th. We got again this Mercury retrograde, but now we're conjunct the Venus.
Mm,
So on an individual level, this might be a good time if you've had any frayed interpersonal relationships to maybe talk out any issues you might have had. Again, Mercury revisiting retrograde. So this might be again a great time to talk things out together. Because of this, as we were early in the month, we had that Venus rubbing shoulders with the Pluto. So again, any of those intense interpersonal relationships might be held out or helped out by this connection. And then as we go to November 26th, we have the Venus connection and the nice watery trine to Jupiter, and then the Saturn. So again, this is a great time to expand on those and work out any of those issues you've had in those relationships. But I think what's maybe overshadowing this week is the Saturn stationing to go direct. Now,
mm.
as we know, any planet that stations to go direct or retrograde is usually one of the loudest planets in the sky. So this week is going to have a very Saturnian feel. Going back to the point we made at the beginning of the video, wherever this lands in your chart and whatever houses Saturn rules, this is a great time now to think about those structures in your life and what areas of life that need that revising. Now Saturn is about to go direct.
For sure. And it's there's that switch of energy again between Saturn and Jupiter, right? So the beginning of the month, Jupiter was stationing to go retrograde at the degree of Saturn that was, pretty stationary, but still direct at that point. And now they've switched sides, right? So Jupiter now is the one that's retrograde and Saturn stationing going direct. So I can't help but again think about the transfer of energy from one to the other. Trines are cooperative in nature. Jupiter rules that Saturn, and it's in really good condition. So maybe again, Callan, like what you were alluding to, maybe towards the end of the month, this is where that the benefits that people might have been waiting for come through. Now that Saturn, the more of the realistic, tangible planet, is moving direct. It's a little ominous just with it still applying to Neptune now. So we'll have to see how that all pans out. But back to that grand water trine situation. Now the sun is out of the picture, and you've got Mercury retrograde and Venus there sitting at the table. So, and the moon again is back in Pisces. So again, it's a total shift in energy, but it's like the people are still there, but the conversation has shifted. And so that relationship piece is definitely involved. And I don't know, we'll just have to see how that shift really occurs. But Jupiter could very well have just been passing a gift on to Saturn that Saturn then takes forward. Neptune dissolves things and likes to kind of still create a lot of confusion with that. So there might be some uncertainty about how the future is going to look in the short term, because it's going right into Aries in the spring. But we'll see. We'll see what goes on there.
So as we get to November 30th, on a lighter note, we've got this Venus connection to Neptune. So I would say if you're artistically inclined, this is a great day or two to pick up a paintbrush, do something creative. And now Venus is going to go from her detriment into more of a freedom-seeking sign. We're immutable fire. So instead of, holding and being fixed, this is going to be a time where this Venus wants a bit more freedom. This Venus wants to explore a bit more. So the heaviness that might have been felt with the Venus in Scorpio starts to lift in my eyes. What are your thoughts there, Chelsea, at the end?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that Venus is still going to be under the beams of the sun, so it might not be like perfect, but it definitely will be a lot more lighthearted. more jovial, so to speak, being ruled by Jupiter in nature. Um, so yeah, and it'll be interesting to see too how relationships shift once Venus enters Sagittarius because Mars is co-present there. So you do have a lot of polarities between the two signs, and then the Sun kind of being the intermediary. So you have to see, maybe this is groups of both men and women getting together and advocating for just the collective rights and I don't know, there just seems to be more people at that Sagittarius table now, and we'll just have to see how that all works.
That's such a wonderful point, talking about the archetypes of both the Venus and the Mars. And again, I think these protests are going to be continuing, especially in the United States. We might see, worldwide protests about the states of governments around the world, but it might just be the coming together of folks in this mutable fire and continued protest that we might see. How this manifests, we'll have to see. But I think that's a great point as we go
Well,
through.
and Venus will have opposed Uranus on its way in. So, there might be having something to do with women's issues that, women's rights, women's issues, women feeling less empowered to gaining empowerment after that opposition to Uranus and Taurus that Venus rules. So, I think that's, worth noting. Again, like I just feel like overall this month really has a lot to do with the way the energy gets passed between the planets and messages going from one to the other and how it evolves over time, from that watery kind of emotional level to more of that external activist nature.
Absolutely. I think those are absolutely wonderful points. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for going through the first weeks of November. And now we're going to switch on to our rising signs and get a bit more specifics of what might be coming up for you. So, Chelsea, first into our Aries rising friends. What are your thoughts for them for the month of November?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you've got the Pisces stellium that you've been working with in that 12th house, that 6th 12th house axis, which is also where the eclipses have been for our Aries rising people, really having a lot to do with this is kind of my health axis. You've got the 6th house of, accidents, injuries, maybe acute illnesses, going on with the 12th house of, maybe chronic illness or some mental health themes going on that continues to be a factor this month, but hopefully there's a bit of resolution as this is the Sun Neptune transits have been going back and forth for quite some time, and there might be some resolution there. I'm hopefully that will be a thing. You've got Venus in the 7th house of relationships, which is amazing. So, maybe having a partner help you with that process has also been helpful this month, as well as Mars in its own home sign with the Sun. That speaks well to maybe some resources that you might not have had available to you that then come forward to be benefiting in some way. So I would say this month, just really self-care is huge. Ask for help if you need it. You should have some good support there. And yeah, that'll be, I don't feel like this is the overall, this is anything that's going to be hard for Aries rising to seek help or to take action in their own right.
Wonderful point. And going back to your point, your chart rule has been strong for some time now. But even when it switches into mutable fire, here we're going into your whole sign, ninth house. Now, depending on what degree you are of Aries rising, eventually that Mars is going to touch upon that. So again, that's a trine into the ascendant. You might have an uplift, again, of fire, of the Mars being in a fire sign, and an uplift in energy. So if there are, to Chelsea's point, any issues in the 6-12th axis, whether that's health related, especially we've got the South Node going through the 6 for a time now as well, then you might get a rush from there. Or it might just be ninth house topics that you're pushing more energy into, whether that's higher education or maybe you're going off for long distance travel, things of this nature. We've got Mercury in the mix there as well. But we're also, I think, for you, Aries Rising, we're going to have a slight financial component. The sun for this month is highlighting your whole sign eighth house. So shared resources. We're going to have Venus come in there as well. But we're also going to have that Uranus. Yes, it's an outer planet, and you want to see more personal connections with the outer planet, but the outer planet is going to retrograde back into your whole sign second house. So there might be a financial picture here. So this can manifest in many different ways. Of course, you've got to look at your own natal chart to see the connections, but not to be too cliche again, but expect the unexpected with Uranus when it's in the whole sign second. Maybe you're revisiting a financial picture. That sun's going to be highlighting the eighth, but that Venus might help because the Venus rules the seventh house. Yes, it's going to be in detriment, but it's going to rule through there. And so that maybe that lesser benefic is going to lighten the load somewhat in that picture. Certainly, I would say you've got this beautifully exalted Jupiter going through your whole sign fourth house. So if you're one of those people who are expanding their home, for example, there may be just something coming up with costs and things of that nature, depending on what's going on. But of course, look at your own natal chart for the more intimate connections there. And I think last thing to point out for Aries Rising, especially if you do have early degrees of Aries Rising, having that Neptune and Saturn push away for a time, maybe that's eased up, especially if you're 1 or 2 degrees. But of course, that picture is going to come back as we move on. But to Chelsea's point, I think, yeah, nothing too dramatic this month. Just practice self-care. I think I would agree with that. Absolutely. Okay, into our Taurus rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, Taurus rising, you have your ruler in its own home sign in the sixth house. So I would think that this would have been or will be a fairly productive month in the very beginning for you. Maybe you're on a great day-to-day regimen where you're pretty disciplined and you're getting in shape. You're productive at work. You have a great relationship with coworkers, something that you have to work with others, maybe in small groups or with one-on-one that actually might be quite productive if you've got a project that's going on. That the willingness of the partner when you've got Mars in its own home sign in the seventh house shows that nature of more of like, I know what to do. If you Venus is really willing to kind of share the workload, and that Mars and Scorpio is willing to maybe take on more than it needs to, and Venus is happy with that. So, but yeah, as the month goes on, you will have that Uranus going back into your first house. So, maybe that does get a bit bumpy as the month goes on, as Venus then loses dignity and goes into the seventh house, and Mars goes into the eighth. There's probably going to have to be a workaround that you can, if you can use the initial part of the month to set yourself up for potential you know, obstacles that might come into place accidentally or suddenly that you have to rework. If you have a solid plan going in, and you kind of plan for the unexpected later on, you should be able to get through that with some ease. That Pluto in the 10th is very interesting as well, because that's still going to be talking to that Uranus in the beginning. So to me, this shows up more from like a career life direction and what you guys do every single day, kind of being somewhat smooth, which is probably foreign, having Uranus in the first forever. So take advantage of the good energy at the beginning of the month and be prepared for maybe a bit of a bumpy ride towards the end, and plan for that if you can.
Great advice, Chelsea. And I think for you, Taurus rising, with the preponderance of the planets, especially the personal planets, you've got here more on the western half of the chart. So in
Mm.
a sense, for a time, this is going to be all about others, whether that's people, in your immediate environment, co-workers, partners, this can be business partners as well, or even more intimate partners if you're talking about shared resources, because we're going to have a lot of these planets shift into your whole sign. Eighth house, we're going to have Mercury in there, we're going to have Mars. The only thing I might watch out for on the shadow side of this is there might possibly be arguments around shared resources. So if there's a financial picture, I know Uranus has just dipped its toes into the whole sign second house. So if there have been any issues around, is there a partner spending too much or something going on with finances, maybe it's a good time to talk this out, but just be mindful with Mars knocking around that that might boil into some argument. So be mindful of that. Yes, Venus, your chart ruler, is going to lose dignity as it moves into your seventh, but anytime a planet becomes angular, even if it's a fast moving planet like Venus, it's still going to be loud, it's still going to be prominent, and it's going to be angular in your seventh house. So again, it might just speak to interpersonal relationship, partners with the eighth house component. This could tie in again to shared resources. And, it's going to be ruling your sixth house, and maybe some things come up from work. And especially with Jupiter, yes, it's exalted, it's in your whole sign third house. Maybe for a time now, you've just been dealing with a lot of work, whether it's just an abundance of emails or communicating, things of this nature. So just watch out for those different themes. I actually like what Chelsea pointed out with this Pluto story, because this is going to be the best part of 20 years. Up there in the 10th house, of course, it's an outer planet. Have a look at your own natal chart to see what connections it makes. But with a big 20-year story, we could be talking about over time, you gaining power in some way, or it could be conflict or power struggles with others, bosses, things of this nature. So that's just something to keep in mind, an eye out for a long time. Now, Saturn's going to be loud this month because it's going to station direct. This is in your whole sign 11th house. So there may be some themes that come up around there, whether that's community organizing, things of this nature. I would point out if you have late degrees of Taurus rising, just watch out for that Uranus as it dips back and retraces its steps into your whole sign first house. And again, not to be too cliche or expect the unexpected with Uranus, just watch out, I would say, if you have late degrees of Taurus rising, I think, for you.
For sure.
Okay, I'm gonna cough here, Jesus. I'm doing so shit today. Like it's
You're
not
not.
coming.
It's all right. I've, I've never done this before, so you don't, you're like
You're
not
nailing it.
like,
Like honestly, you're a natural at this. It's absolutely
mm.
brilliant. Sorry, 1 second.
I would prefer to be way more prepared than I am for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely not prepared today whatsoever. But you're a natural. Like you're wonderfully articulate, and you're pulling in the wider pieces together with like the translations of the. It's probably helpful you got the chart next to you as well. I think that's a really
Oh
good
God,
way of
yes.
doing it. Yeah. Yeah, you've been wonderful. I've been absolutely shit. Okay, I'll
No,
stop
you've
now.
been
I'm getting
fine.
to the limit. Okay. Jesus, won't fuck off. All right, let's try this again.
All right.
Okay, into our Gemini Rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Gemini Rising, I am so curious to know how that Uranus ingress has been, as well as the station. You've really had a huge exposure to a lot of speed, I think, within maybe, your individuality and, maybe your belief structure, I think is really been called to look at and to play with. I would imagine that it would kind of feel better just because Gemini risings really tend to be quick and like to be able to bounce around and do a lot of stuff. So I would anticipate that Uranus ingress with Pluto trining it from the ninth house, maybe a lot of opportunities that come from that, wider thinking, wider perspective, long distance travel, people that, you've had in, that have come into your life from faraway lands or the internet world is I'm just curious, especially when you've got Venus trining all of that in its home sign in your fifth house of creativity. I just be curious to see if there's been new people coming in that really excite you and get you pumped up, really expand your horizons intellectually, socially, mentally, philosophically. I think that's going to be quite interesting to see that, really open big this month, as well as then maybe kind of get a bit of a downer as the month goes on, as you get planets changing signs and slowing down, which might seem like a kind of a drag. Gemini risings love speed and they like to move, and then they're getting like a little taste of that, and then being asked to slow down again, having Saturn, Neptune, and the moon in the 10th house. And Venus changing signs and going into Scorpio in the sixth is really kind of getting down into the nitty gritty again and having to roll up your sleeves and put some work into things. But I think, having that Jupiter in the second house has got to just been a really great way of, maybe you have new opportunities that have come through meeting people in the way you're earning a living or making money, or having that Saturn, Neptune, and then the moon at the beginning of the month in the 10th house. Again, just it seems like a lot of newness for Gemini rising, stuff that they're excited to be exposed to, but really only get a taste before they have to kind of scale it back again and then go back into a bit of a boring, mundane situation in the short term. But know that it's temporary. It might be, annoying, but overall, I think long term, whatever is going on that's requiring the slowdown and the step back in the short term is going to be really helping catapult you into what you've been exposed to already.
See, I absolutely love those points. And going back to what you were saying about people coming into their lives and broadening new horizons, as you mentioned, we've got this wonderfully exalted Jupiter in the second, it's ruling the seventh. So maybe individuals coming into your life to broaden your horizon. Yes, but when we look at the preponderance of the planets, we're still here with these personal planets on the western half of the chart. So we are literally talking about other people in your life. These are the transits highlighting this. We're going to have the Mercury. Yes, it's going to station to go retrograde, which is going to be significant for you considering it's your chart ruler. And speaking to Chelsea's point, things might slow down a bit, so that might be a little bit frustrating. But then we're going to see Mars go into there as well, and then eventually the Sun. So really are highlighting whether it's new people that might come into your life, maybe partners or business partners. I'd only a word of caution with that Mars is that anytime a planet becomes angular in your chart, it has the potential to be loud. So, this can manifest many different ways, but the shadow side of this could be some minor conflicts with one-on-one, whether that's partners, business partners, things of this nature. I'd say for you, Gemini Rising, to speak to Chelsea's point, you like to be busy. This is mutable air. I think as we get towards the end of the month, we're going to have that Venus losing dignity going into your sixth. I've just got this sense that things might get a bit frustrating for you, especially if it pertains to things like work matters. That Mars going into the seventh, ruling the sixth. Keep an eye out for that. But in general, I'm really loving this Jupiter story. Of course, that's going to go retrograde itself, and it's going to be there for a while. But I would say, if things get a bit turbulent towards the end of the month, don't worry too much because that will smooth over as we get through the rest of the months. Also, we've got the Saturn being quite loud this month as it stations to go direct. This just might pull up 10th house matters going through there, but it also rules the 8th and ninth house. So just watch out for themes that might come out from there as well for you, Gemini Rising. Wonderful. Okay, into our Cancer Rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to ignore that Jupiter in the first house. It's going to station retrograde. So maybe you've had a great. I can imagine it would have been a great time so far with Jupiter in your first house. Really expansive, but at the same time, I know a lot of cancers that really love to overindulge. And so at this point, you might have been, with that conversation with Saturn up there in the ninth house, it's again getting it a bit checked of like, okay, how much is too much? And do I need to rein that in a little bit? I think that's a really huge story for Cancer Rising. I also feel like Venus in the fourth house of relationships, I'm sorry, holy shit. Um, Home, family, dynamics, that seems to be super, super fun and solid right now. But again, like it'll be interesting later at the end of the month to see how those dynamics kind of come into play. There could be issues with, different philosophical views, like maybe towards Thanksgiving when family gets together and Venus has changed signs and Jupiter goes retrograde, Saturn stations direct, Mars goes into the sixth house. There's something about, I guess, the relationship between you and family members, or, there could be some tension there that develops over time that causes you to maybe rethink, you know, what you want, what you need, how you get it, and also how you might have contributed to the situation. And a good self-reflection would be to not take everything so personally, but also see, like, you do have a lot going for you. And so focus on what is working and maybe try to let go of what is not, for the sake of the greater picture of the whole situation.
Wonderful point. And speaking to your point about, feeling that sense, not for everybody, but maybe feeling that sense of abundance, this wonderfully exalted Jupiter. Yes, it's going to go retrograde and go back, but in the whole sign first house, maybe this has been a time for a while now where you felt that abundance and joy. But the shadow side of this is it's not always great for the waistline. So if, to Chelsea's
Yes.
point, if you have been overindulging, we've got Jupiter ruling the sixth as well. Maybe it's time to rein some of that in. But this might be helpful because as we have Mars that goes into Sagittarius, it's going to go through your whole sign sixth house. This might be a great time to maybe have a new health regime. Your day-to-day life maybe fit in times at the gym. So if there has been a time where, yes, you've been enjoying life, but with the abundance comes, sometimes a lack of discipline, then at this point with that Mars going through the sixth, you might have that energy or that push just to put in a new workout regime, things of this nature. I think at the beginning of this month, this is a great time to beautify the home. We've got Venus zipping through the whole sign of the fourth. And as we get Venus, yes, she's losing dignity going into Scorpio, but this is, quite nice for Cancer risings because it goes into a water sign. It's the whole sign fifth house of joy. So this can manifest many different ways. This might be a great time for creative pleasures, creative enjoyment. If you have any children, this is a great time to play with them. That Venus is going to make a connection, a nice connection with your ascendant at some point. So, this might help as well. But again, if you have that sense of overindulgence, just be careful of not going overboard. But I think this Mars picture will help with this. And with the Mercury involved in there as well in the sixth, at least for a time before it stations to go retrograde, you can write down maybe your plan for your fitness regime or whatever that might be for you, Cancer risings.
Well, yeah, I think that the fertility, right, is going to be a thing for Cancer risings, really, as Jupiter is in their first house the whole year. And this would be one of those times where planning is probably going to matter, with Saturn being up in the ninth whole sign house going into the 10th. You if you are wanting to conceive, or if you are thinking about, that type of thing, these might be auspicious times for you. But if you are not wanting to do that, you might want to have some careful planning involved, because I think overall, Cancer risings, this is quite a fertile time with that, to your point. Venus going from the fourth into the fifth, trining all of those, the Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter planets, quite be auspicious, also creatively as well, but, creatively in the humanistic sense is a thing. So, just, fair warning
I
for what
absolutely love
it's worth.
that. I absolutely love that point. I think the last thing I'll say for you, Cancer Rising, that I think my energy is what I would do with this energy is focus more on people in your immediate environment, whether that's lovers, family, friends, co-workers. I think it's going to be a bit more of a push to put your energy into larger group settings, like community settings, things of
Yeah.
this nature, because as Venus goes into a detriment, yes, it's going to make nice connections with your ascendant, but she goes into a detriment ruling the 11th house, and we're going to have the Uranus dip its toes back into the 11th whole sign house. So I would probably focus my energies more on your immediate environment and the people there rather than the bigger picture. That's just the feeling I'm get for you for
Yes, for
this.
sure. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, into our Leo rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Leo rising. Okay. Well, you guys are ruled by that sun in Scorpio and the moon is there, or I'm sorry, Mars is there. Hello. And so again, I think this is probably a pretty good time for, home family dynamics might be quite productive. So if you are working at home or you are acquiring property or something of that nature, this might be an auspicious time for you to do that with Venus in the third house. Um, yeah, I think that's an interesting story. It's interesting to see how Jupiter in the 12th might be affecting maybe you're been a bit self-sacrificial at times, and so maybe the sun showing up in the fourth house might kind of cause you to kind of want to rein that in a little bit with Jupiter stationing retrograde in the 12th house. Maybe it's like you've given quite a bit to that situation, and now you're needing to kind of reserve some of that for yourself before it gets too out of control. So that could be again expenses. It could be towards your parents or extended family, whatever. And it's causing you now to kind of say, okay, like I might have overextended myself here a little bit. I need to rein that back. And you know. With the eighth house component, Jupiter ruling that eighth house, with Saturn there, it's stationing. It's like, I need to kind of conserve more for me too, is kind of what I'm seeing. So, yeah, and then that Pluto in the seventh house transit, that's going to be a 20-year transit, but it'll be interesting to see how that then affects like your one-on-one relationships with Uranus there in the 11th. Like maybe, people have way too many opinions on what you're doing, like they're throwing in their thoughts where they're not wanted. That could definitely be a theme. So, shutting out some of the noise, maybe reining some self back, maybe reining it in more for yourself at this point. Leo risings tend to be able to be doing that just fine. And yeah, just kind of more financial as kind of where I'm seeing it and giving to just maybe over excess and needing to change that a little bit.
Wonderful advice, Chelsea. And I think for the positives for you, Leo Rising, we've got your chart rule in the whole sign, fourth house, so highlighting home and family. We're going to have Venus come along as well. So this might be a nice time as we go through the month to just, again, just be close to kin, be close to family, beautify the home maybe in some way, maybe redecorate the office, things of this nature. And I think for you as well, as we get that Mars going into the whole sign fifth house, Mercury's going to be there for a little bit, stationed to go retrograde and come back. But if you need an outlet or if life is getting a bit frustrating, I would certainly find if you're sports inclined, I would certainly find an outlet, whether you're going to play, what's the new fan thing now, like pickleball or tennis. I know it's cold now, well, in the Northern Hemisphere, but if you can find an outlet for
We
that
can do it
creativity,
indoors.
indoors as well, yeah. Creative energy, let that push out through the fifth house because those, especially the Mars, will eventually make a nice connection with your ascendant degree, whatever that might be. So just use that fire energy to propel you because we do have a lot of water this month. And for a rising fire sign, that can be a little bit, it's not complementary, these elements. But I think that Mars might be a helpful picture and that Venus coming through as well. But speaking to Chelsea's point, there might be what an annoyance with this financial picture that has come back into the fray. So not only we've got the Saturn retrograding back, which is going to station this month, we've got the Neptune in the picture as well. We've got the South Node going through the whole sign second house. So if you're annoyed, and to Chelsea's point, if you've been over sacrificing, maybe you've been too generous with other people in your life, just being mindful of that financial picture. That Saturn might be annoying. For instance, if you're looking to borrow from a bank or things of
Mm.
this nature, that Saturn is not always helpful. Of course, you've got to look at your own chart to see what other connections are going on, but that just might be a sense of annoyance for you until Saturn finally stations to go direct and then pisses off out of the eighth whole sign house and goes into the ninth. Because even when it goes into the ninth, into its fall, I think it's a little bit more beneficial than it has been with the mutable water energy. That's just my feel, I think, for you, Leo Rising. The last point here I will make is that we've got Uranus going to retrograde and dip its toes back into the whole sign 10th house. So again, depending on if it's making any more personal connections in your chart, you might see the themes of career, public standing come back up. And again, not to be too cliche, but expect the unexpected with Uranus, especially eventually when that stations to go direct and go back through the last degrees of the whole sign 10th house. Just keep that in mind as time goes on. But other than that, yeah, enjoy kin, enjoy time at home, and find that creative outlet for you, Leo Rising. Wonderful. Okay, into our Virgo Rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, I bet you guys are super ready for that Saturn to get back out of your seventh house. I think eclipses have been a challenge here with the first seventh axis. Relationships and self really have become a big focus, and I think that Virgo risings are going to have the benefit of friends and groups in order to help them through that process with Jupiter in the 11th house, and Venus. The benefics in a position more of, I think, support in this process is going to be the key here. They're both in great shape in this month. So, again, like this could be the calm in between eclipse storms. And I think that having benefics in positions where they can be of help to you, friends, groups, the ability to support yourself. These are the things that really are going to help get you through these processes as you are dealing with this eclipse cycle that started last fall and is going to go through 2026. And so this month especially is a great auspicious month to lean in for the people around you for support, and know that you have the ability with that Uranus going back and forth between the ninth and the 10th house, speaking to that Venus in the second of just, it might be a little bumpy, but overall you're going to get through it. And so I think that's great. I think Mars going into the fourth house might be a bit problematic, just in the sense of, maybe you might have to switch, your living situation. You might have to uproot unexpectedly, making contact with, Mars is going to make contact with that Uranus at some point, and then Mercury there too. So still quite, angular activity with the Virgo risings. But there is, as they say, like look for the helpers, and you do have them this month in the terms of the ability to still get yourself through this financially, and, holding on to your value systems and what you believe in, as well as friends and groups being willing to lend a hand if necessary.
Full points, Chelsea. And picking up on what you're saying, I think the benefics are going to be very valuable for Virgo rising because, as you mentioned, we've got this wonderfully exalted Jupiter. Yes, it's going to be stationed to go retrograde, but it's ruling the seventh house and it's ruling the fourth. But the picture here is we're going to have two malefics still in these angular houses with the Saturn that will station to go direct this month and that Mars coming in. So with the landlord being Jupiter, I think that's going to help, but it still not might mitigate all the disruptions or potential for conflict, especially when we're talking about home life. Just watch out for that. Of course, whatever your degree sign is, eventually it's going to square that ascendant. And another picture I'm picking up on here is you might have a sense for a time now, a sense of vitality issues or draining because we've got the South Node transiting through the first house. We're going to have your chart ruler in its detriment, stationing to go retrograde. And we'll have that Saturn in station to go direct, ruling the sixth house, and Pluto in the picture there as well, which is a longer story. But I can't help but think that if you've been overdoing things or taking on too much work, then I would certainly recommend anything that's to do with self-care. And whether you get help from this with larger groups or with partners, if someone can just take you for a spa day, I think that might be quite helpful for you because for some of you, maybe this vitality picture has been an issue. But I certainly agree with you, Chelsea. I think those benefics are very helpful in this picture as you move forward. So my biggest word of advice is take care of yourselves, I think, Virgo
Yep.
Rising. Wonderful. Okay, into our Libra rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, Libra rising, you have your chart ruler in your first house at this point. So a good boost if you guys have been struggling with maybe health stuff as Venus was in Virgo, and good health, good vitality, good relationship dynamic, good measure of self-care going on here, as well as, Jupiter in your 10th house of career, maybe benefiting from what you do every single day. Maybe you're gaining opportunities in the long term with where your life is headed, career life direction, how you show up into the world. It seems to be all going really, really well. And I know that Saturn Neptune in the sixth house has maybe caused you over the last, few years to get really serious about how regimented you are in the daily. And, it's all paying off. Like Saturn transits get better over time. And it's asking you one last time to really make sure that what you've done over the last couple of years is going to stick. And so I feel this more as being kind of like reinforced through maybe one last situation that you have to face. Is this all going to hold everything that you guys have been working through, from a daily routine, a daily new habit that you've created for yourself? That also is a good thing. I also see Mars in the second, again, helping benefit you whatever resources that you can kind of drum up in the short term through this Mars transit. Definitely take advantage of what is coming at this point. And then as Mars changes signs, goes into the third house, there might be a bit of disruption with, neighbors, siblings, extended family, daily commutes. There might be some upheaval there, especially with the opposition to Uranus in the ninth house, So I guess my advice in the short term is if what you've been doing is working, Saturn's going to come in and give you a check. Looks like you've got some good support there in the short term. Maybe sock away some money for long term, some short term disruptions that might come up that you might have to deal with. This could be travel issues. This could be vehicle issues, commuting, neighbors, something with regard to the community around you might get a little bit bumpy, and you might have to, financially have to deal with something in the short term. So take advantage of the energy now, and you're doing great. Yeah.
Kelsey, as a Libra rising myself, you are so on point with your points here. So on point. I think what has been helpful, speaking as a Libra rising, of course, we had our chart rule in fall for a time, but I've certainly felt more of the vitality come back. And it's quite interesting talking about that Saturn long-term picture. It's been a while and I've, fallen off the wagon a few times with eating crap and too much sugar. But now I'm finally with this last check-in with Saturn. And for everybody watching this who's Libra rising, this is our last check-in with Saturn. I've got my Peloton that's just arrived. I've started out on that. So that day-to-day structure of our lives, whether it's health, fitness, is really a focus here. And this Saturn is going to either give us our rewards as we move on or give us a bit of a slap round the ear and say, we need to sort this out. Because as Chelsea said, this is going to be our last check-in. So yeah, if you have been working on that, I certainly have. This Venus having dignity certainly helped. I went off and had a nice, not quite a spa day as Venus went over my ascendant, but that's quite nice. But if you've got late degrees of Venus rising, Libra rising, certainly take advantage of that because, of course, we've gone from fall into our dignity and then we're going to go into our detriment in terms of our chart ruler. But still, things aren't too bad. We've got this wonderfully exalted Jupiter. It's ruling the sixth. So in terms of vitality and health-wise, it might not be too much of an issue. The only thing that might come up for us, I think, for this month, as we have some of those faster moving personal planets go through our third house, Mercury's going to come through retrograde and turn back. We're going to have Mars come through there, the Sun eventually as well. And we've got this heavy sixth house picture. This might just be an uptick in workload. So whether you're doing a lot of work with communications, maybe this month your email and correspondence just goes through the roof. That it's still Jupiter ruled the third house. Mars in there. Maybe we're going to be a bit more short or shorter with people in our communications, just because we have so many people to respond to. And again, with that Saturn Neptune picture and the North Node in the sixth house, this might be to do with just a lot going on in our day-to-day work and our day-to-day lives. So that's something to keep an eye on, and making sure you have a healthy outlet to keep yourself healthy and in shape and things of that nature. Wonderful. And okay, into our Scorpio rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Scorpio rising, it's very similar to the Libra, only it's the way Scorpio deals with it, really diving into a measure of, taking action for yourself, maybe pulling back from partnership and really, focusing on your own immediate needs and what works for you. And, just Scorpios need that time to detach and recover and just shut everything out and have the quiet. And this could just be that time that you need to, or you've been doing with Mars being there for the last few weeks, of just pulling back and doing that healthy measure of boundaries and self-care that you need for you. So I think doing more for you is awesome. The Jupiter in the ninth house could just be, you've taken a course and you've learned something in the comfort of your own home privately. You've you know, I don't know. I get the sense of it's not so much. I guess it could be physical personal travel, but this seems more on the private nature of it. Cancer is a private, kind of a more of a private side. Scorpio is private. The water signs like retreat, and they need that for recovery because the world can get quite overwhelming at times. I think with all of the water influence there, and so healthy measure of withdrawal is good, I think, is what's going to be and has been going on in the short term, especially with Venus in the 12th in her own home sign. Again, it just speaks to a measure of doing more for you, taking care of you. And then that Saturn Neptune in the fifth house of children, it just could be you and your kids and doing something together, but that also fills your cup up, so to speak, again. And I think that, Mars changing signs going into the second house with Mercury retrograde there might be some measure of, I don't know, like maybe a let going of some sort of, there might be having to spend some money, maybe having to do with groups that you're affiliated with, or, you know, I don't know, something regarding friends groups that you eventually do have to get pulled back out into the world to deal with, with that 11th house ruler going back into your first from the second, and then the first going into the second. There's an exchange there of, having to then get pulled back out, and then, maybe a partner, the eighth house, the eighth house ruler, and the 11th house ruler going in from the second to the first, friends, resources, needing to go help somebody move, needing to go lend somebody some money, or just to become a little bit more public. I think as the month goes on is going to be something that you're going to have to probably contend with a little bit.
Wonderful point. And I think for you, Scorpio rising, because you understand that water element so much, it might not be as much of an issue, especially with this month, as Chelsea talked about at the beginning of the video, all of this water energy coming through this month. And I kind of like the houses it touches, because obviously you've got a water rising, you've got the fifth and the ninth. So, on the flip side of that, the shadow side could be, with too much water, you can drown. So trying
Hmm.
to get a bit of perspective or pulling yourself out of the way to think things through might be helpful, especially with Mercury and a fire sign as well. Just give it a bit more impetus. But what might be nice is we're going to have this Venus eventually come through into your whole sign first house. So, if eventually when it goes over that descendant degree, I always say just go and treat yourself to a spa day. If life is getting a bit cumbersome, go and enjoy yourself, go and have a nice time. I've liked this Jupiter for a while now, this wonderfully exalted Jupiter in the ninth. So whether you've been expanding your horizons overseas or very simply just expanding your horizons with higher education, maybe you're involved in Kepler College and you're studying right now. I think that Jupiter is wonderfully helpful because it makes this connection with the fifth and the first as well. But I would say to Chelsea's point, as that Mars moves into the whole sign second house, we can have Mercury there as well, stationing to go retrograde. So there might be a financial picture that comes up. Of course, that Mercury rules the 11th. So as Chelsea's saying, it might pull in other people. We're going to have Uranus, which is a larger story that's only just tickled its toes into the whole sign eighth house. It's going to push back into the whole sign seventh. So watch out for a story that might come back in terms of business partners or partners of a significant nature, because that's going to come back as well. So I do think that might be some of the focus, some financial picture might come up for you, Scorpio rising. And of course, the long story is this going to be this Pluto and Aquarius for the best part of 20 years. And I feel why this is just as important for you. Well, I think one of the main things is it's angular in your chart. So this is going to be a large story about home life. Where do you see your roots essentially with this Pluto, digging up the dirt for the next 20 years about what's going on. But that's going to be a larger picture as we go through the years for you, Scorpio rising.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, into our Sagittarius rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Sag rising. Okay, so you've got your chart ruler in the eighth house of other people's money, debt, taxes, and inheritance. It'll be interesting to see how that Jupiter transit has been going so far, especially as it stations for the first time, and whether you've overextended yourself, maybe in borrowing, or you've also had the gift. I mean, Jupiter brings gifts and opportunities as well. So, something with eighth house matters and Jupiter stationing retrograde this month might be interesting to see how sometimes initially you can receive something and then the retrograde it might not be as great as you thought. So, especially with Saturn in the fourth and you've got that Mars Sun in the 12th. I get the impression that, it maybe a bit of a too good to be true situation could be a possible thing here, with, having something to do with home, family, other people's resources, and something that you might not have been aware of that comes to light as Jupiter stations retrograde and then Mars goes into the first house. And that Mercury flipping between that first and 12th house. Like there's something there that I think is a bit of a cautionary tale, that is worth paying attention to. And it doesn't mean that it's all bad, but I just think that what might have seemed like just overly the top amazing might have to get scaled back a little bit in the short term and reworked. I think Sag risings tend to be quite obviously optimistic in nature, and they want the best, and they don't tend to want to. They always see the silver lining in something, and so when something really big happens, they just kind of take it and run, and go with it in the most optimistic way. But at the same time, they can get ahead of themselves quite easily, and so I think this situation might lend itself to a bit of a check, and it would be worth investigating just a little bit. I think Venus in the 11th house of friends and groups. I mean, Sag risings love all of this, right? They love their friends, they love groups, they love being out, they love, the relationships and doing the things. So there's still some really great aspects to that the friends group stuff. It just really kind of still is always there in a positive situation in the beginning of the month. So anyway, I feel like just cart before the horse situation here. Not to use a horse pun for Sag risings, but seriously, I think this might be a thing.
I love that. That's so funny. Not using the horse pun. Yeah, I'm totally with you, Chelsea, on this. I think there's going to be a part of this month for you, Sagittarius rising. It's not quite your season yet. So yes, at the beginning of the month, we still have this wonderfully dignified Venus in the 11th. Group activities should work out well. But as we get a little bit further, we've got the Sun, the Mars there tailing in. We're highlighting the whole sign 12th house. So you might be feeling, maybe not pushing yourself too much and being a bit more behind the scenes. If you need to take a bit of a retreat or get behind, that might be helpful. That Mars has been a larger story. So whether you've been involved in any behavior that's been self-undoing in any way. Maybe that's going to be a check-in as well. One thing I'd watch out for is that, especially if you're early degrees of Sagittarius rising, just keep an eye out for that Mars as it comes through. That, that Mars, you can never just focus on one transit. But sometimes with that Mars coming over the ascendant, just make sure you're extra careful. Just simple things like if you're in the kitchen with sharp objects, things of this nature. Of course, that can manifest in many different ways. It might just be a case where you feel more vivacious or have a bit more vitality to go and do things. Of course, your chart ruler is very dignified. It's ruling the fourth house, so it's the ruler of the fourth house matters. But again, it's a mixed picture. We've got a dignified Jupiter, in the eighth. Have you, to Chelsea's point before, maybe have you been over borrowing, but it's the landlord of the fourth house. But you're probably a bit annoyed with that Saturn going back into the fourth house. Maybe there's a story in terms of the home life or your home living situation that you need to revisit. And that Saturn is going to give you one more check in with whatever has been going on or whatever structural processes have been going on with the home and family life. We'll need one more revisit before Saturn buggers off out of there, because it's, especially having a malefic in an angular house, it can be quite loud and be quite problematic. But it might just be one last check-in with that Saturn to see if you've got really those structures in place to move yourself forward as we go through the rest of this year into next year as well.
Well, yeah, and I also, just to kind of dovetail on what you're saying, is, with the Uranus becoming angular and then going back and forth between that sixth and seventh house, and you've got that seventh house ruler going back from the first into the 12th, the unforeseen events maybe pertaining to partnership or with your partner also, it can be a thing. So, not only taking care of self, but, being maybe cautionary tale to whoever you're in partnership with, making sure that they're aware that the potentials of that are real. I mean, sometimes we see things that go on in other people's lives in our charts, and it doesn't always pertain to us personally. So that's just something else that's kind of came up as you've been speaking.
That's a great point, Chelsea. And we've obviously got this Mercury component as well, only for a short while, but Mercury in detriment, stationing to go retrograde, rule in the seventh. I mean, it might just highlight some of those issues that you've just been pointing out. Wonderful point. Absolutely.
Margin of error is small. We'll put it that way.
Right. Okay, on to our Capricorn Rising. Friends, Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, Cap Rising is dealing with a lot of 11th house stuff, which I think in the short term is okay. Your exalted ruler, Mars in Scorpio, and the 11th of Friends looks like it's been pretty productive. Might have been, maybe you've gotten quite serious with some friend groups and you really want to dive into serious study. I mean, you're going, Mars in Scorpio is going to go into that 12th house, and Mercury's going to switch with it, oppose Uranus. Maybe you've come up with something with some groups that you then want to need to go kind of behind the scenes and work through in order to bring that back out publicly. That Saturn in the third house, your chart ruler, is kind of maybe asking for a bit of slowdown there, where if you're working on a project with friends, or if you're working on a new way of communicating or bringing that out into the community or something, maybe some great ideas have happened with the sun there and Mars, and you need to really take some time to revise it and go behind the scenes to to work through whatever that is. That Saturn in the third has been there for a while. And so it just could be that one last push you need to really, you know, get everything sorted and organized in a way that you can then bring forward publicly later. And that Jupiter in the seventh house of relationships, trining that all seems like it's a good auspicious time, but it does seem like whatever projects or whatever things got initiated initially are being asked to get revised and maybe worked on. But I think that overall it's not going to be a bad thing. That Venus in the 10th house looks very promising in whatever you have going on in support there. Maybe you have, you know, a boss or you have somebody that's behind you guys trying to help support this, and then that Venus will eventually go into the 11th. Maybe that person needs to kind of sit at the table with you all while you work on this. So with Venus changing signs and going into Scorpio towards the end of the month, might be actually a beneficial type of situation. Uranus in the sixth, I think I touched on that a little bit. We're just, again, like needing to maybe make some course corrections and some changes in the way the communication happens with whatever is going on there.
Wonderful points. And I think for you, Capricorn Rising, if it's been a hard go of life for a while now, especially with your chart ruler, I think these benefics are going to be your friends. Again, we have this wonderfully exalted Jupiter, which has been there for a while now. Any planet that goes angular is going to be quite prominent. So whether you're getting support from either business relations or partners, that's going to be help from there. And to Chelsea's point, with Venus in her dignity, um, angular in the 10th house, maybe getting support from superiors. I think that's going to be a nice picture for you because I think on the whole, with that, your chart ruler, you might have had that taste with the chart ruler in its fall in the whole sign fourth house. You might have fell into issues with the home and family life. Maybe there's issues going on that you've just had a taste of, but I think it's quite maybe a little nicer for you, even though retrograde and going back into Pisces, it might have just pulled the pressure off a little bit because with that Mars having dignity for a time now through Scorpio ruling the fourth house, maybe you've had a little bit of time to whip things into shape when it pertains to the home and family life, whether you're having issues with, it could be children in the home, whoever it might be, home and family life might have been an issue. So that Saturn and Neptune pulling back into Pisces might just give you a little bit more breathing room to when eventually they turn direct and come back through the fourth and maybe give you, again with Saturn, a way to plan ahead for the future. And being in the whole sign fourth house with Venus, is exalted rule of the third, it might just give you a little bit of time to write down the notes and plan for what might be coming ahead in the next couple of months and years, even as you push through that. But yeah, I think for you, as we're talking about planets above the horizon, that Venus is dignified. So again, getting help from superiors you might be looked favorably upon in terms of your public standing as that Venus. Yes, she's going to lose some dignity and go into the 11th, but again, this might still be a great time to get support from larger groups, whether you're involved in group communities, things of that nature. You've got the sun highlighting the whole sign 11th for a time as well. The one thing that might be a bit of an issue for a short period of time is Mercury in its detriment going through your whole sign 12th house, stationing to go retrograde. So just be mindful. Sometimes with this, it's not always the case, but just watch out for people talking shit behind your back. Things of this nature, it's this 12th house connection, but that Mercury's going to go back into the 11th. So just be mindful of maybe some of that. That's not going to be for everyone. Obviously, look at your own chart to see what's going on. But I think, again, if life has been cumbersome for you, you're certainly going to get from support from either those one-on-one relations or those in wider society, I think, for you. And to Chelsea's point, that Uranus is stationing to go retrograde and dip its toes back for the last time into Taurus. So just watch out for those fifth house issues, whether it's, maybe something going on with children, all those different fifth house issues. It can manifest in many different ways, but that's going to be the story for a little bit till eventually Uranus goes direct and eventually goes back through to the sixth house. But when it does come to the sixth house, you might have already had that early story of what that's starting to look like, whether that's not to be too cliche, but whether that's a shake up in your day-to-day routines, maybe health issues might come around, or essentially it might just be a time where you need to shake up your health regime, things of this nature, especially with Saturn not being in great shape at this moment in time. So yeah, just keep those things in mind. Certainly get help from other people to help you move forward, I think, for you. But okay, into our Aquarius rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Hard to ignore that Pluto in the first house, right? That Aquarius risings have been dealing with for some time. A huge 20-year life span of self-reinvention. There could have been a lot that was worked through with Pluto and Capricorn that is now coming to light in the first house. So curious to see how that first trine with Uranus in the fifth, a kind of a benefic relationship between the two. Curious to see how that's been going. It's been a thing for some time. But Jupiter in your sixth house has also been helpful, I think, in that process. If it's been a bit of a struggle from that Pluto in the first transition going back and forth over Capricorn, I would think that Jupiter supporting the sixth house of, health and routine and, just the day to day, maybe smoothing out a little bit. Again, having that support in the 10th house with Mars in its own home sign and the sun there, maybe feeling a lot more empowered than you have in the past, and willing to take some positive steps forward. Uh, Financial issues might have been a strain in the last couple of years with the Saturn Neptune thing, trying to find a way to make ends meet. But I think with Jupiter finally getting into Cancer, and even if it's going retrograde, it's got to have been a nice shift from the resource situation. Jupiter really mitigating some of that. I think Mercury stationing retrograde in the whole sign 11th house and going back into the 10th, maybe something again that you were pursuing with some friends and groups that you might have been introduced to that, you might have second thoughts about, or just in a way of like, changing your association with maybe people that you work with that have become friends that you might want to change course correction on there. But the ninth house of, learning, long distance travel, maybe benefic, people of a feminine nature, being also there to support that process is also, I think, going to be a good thing from that first house and fifth house relationship. And so, yeah, I think overall, like it's going to be a long haul with Aquarius rising and Pluto in the first, but you will have these moments of support, and I think that the benefics being in the ninth and the sixth are great to help with that, maybe that transformative initial process that needs to go on.
Points, Chelsea. And not to be too redundant here, but that's one thing I was looking at is the financial picture for you, Aquarius Rising. Of course, you've known this story for a time now with that Saturn and the Neptune. But here we've also got the nodes coming through. So we've got the South node coming through the whole sign eighth house, North node in the second house. So for this Saturn, it might just be the last revision about how you're structuring your finances, the income, how it might be tied to shared resources as well. So it might just be the last check-in with Saturn to think about how you're structuring your life, but in a financial picture, because eventually that Saturn is going to station direct, which it will do this month, and then eventually, as your chart rule as well, significant, it's going to move out of that second house and into the whole sign third house, and then eventually Neptune will come along as well. But to Chelsea's point, you do have a wonderfully exalted Jupiter in the sixth. It's ruling the second house, so having a landlord that's in great shape. And yes, Jupiter's going to station to go retrograde and come through, but the relative strength of that Jupiter is going to be helpful, particularly if you have a day chart as well. So if you have your sun above the horizon, your diurnal chart, then that Jupiter is on the team and maybe even more beneficial as well. I would certainly say yes to your point, Chelsea. We've got a wonderfully dignified Venus going through the ninth. If you want to go on a long distance pleasure trip still at the early part of November, this will be nice. Or as you get further into the month, we're going to have that Venus, yes, losing some dignity, but going into the angular 10th house. So when it comes over that midheaven, I don't know, maybe you're been thinking in the financial picture of asking for a raise from a boss. And, with Venus coming through there, that might be a nice time to ask for it. But the only dampener there is we're going to have Mercury detriment, turning station to go retrograde, rule in the eighth as well. So even though we do have the greater benefic rule in the second, we do have that Mercury picture rule in the eighth. So this might just be a mixed bag. Of course, look at your own natal chart to see more of those intimate connections. And of course, this 20-year story with Pluto transiting through your first house. Again, any planet that's angular in your chart is going to be loud, especially if you have early degrees of Aquarius Rising. I mean, let us know in the comments how that's been treating you so far. I remember speaking to Michael Luton once, and he said when Pluto comes into a sign, it's like a bird coming and sitting on the lawn. But when it comes back through the second time, which it is, it's like an explosion. So let us know how that Pluto story, if it is, making a story for you right now. And of course, the sun's highlighting the 10th house as well. So we've got a lot of these personal planets above the horizon. So there might be a lot of work out in public and, of course, in that social realm above the horizon. And you're going to have that 11th house whole sign picture as well with the sun, the Mars, and the Mercury and whole sign 11th. So there might be a lot of activity around community gatherings or community groups, things of that nature. But I think that that Jupiter is going to be especially helpful, Chelsea. Yep, I think so.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, last but certainly not least, into our Pisces rising friends. Chelsea, your thoughts?
Yeah, so similar to the Virgo rising, where you've been having eclipses now in your first and seventh houses, and luckily your chart ruler Jupiter is in good position to support you from the fifth house. This could just be, creative pursuits and your children, or something that you do with a significant other that really helps with the Saturn influence in that first house. Being a Pisces rising myself, I always noticed when Saturn was in or out of the first, whether it was coming from the 12th and going in, or going from the second and going back into the first. Like, it's just an overall feeling of heaviness. You definitely, Pisces can feel the things, and we feel the things with Saturn. um and so I think that saving grace of the chart ruler Jupiter in the fifth house of of fun and children and creativity and just hobbies, all of that is super helpful, as well as Venus in the eighth, of other people's resources. Again, kind of the reverse, you might enjoy your children and the things that they bring to you. It could just be, they make you a picture, or you go get manicures and pedicures together. I don't know. I don't know. It's something that, is somewhat pleasurable. I think Mars becoming angular here, and the Mars Venus switch that we just keep talking about, and then affecting that angular fourth house of Uranus is still going to bring in a lot of work life balance that I think is also highlighted by the eclipse cycle of the first and seventh. I think anytime you have angular eclipses, all angles get highlighted for that period of time. And so this can be a time where all aspects of life can feel really changeable, for good or for bad, whatever. It's change, it's inevitable. And so I think, again, like the look to the helpers situation here, is going to be the silver lining in that. And, other people's resources being there to support you, as well as just trying to focus on having fun and where the good parts of it are, and really hold on to that.
What points, Chelsea? And speaking as a Pisces rising yourself, I love that. And honing in on your point about change, I think the benefit for Pisces rising is it is a mutable rising sign. So maybe, unless you've got a lot of fixed planets in your chart, but in general, a mutable rising sign may be more adaptable in that sense that if that change is coming, you're able to adjust and move around accordingly. But what I do love for Pisces rising for a time now as being this wonderfully exalted Jupiter going through the joy of the fifth house. It's probably been making nice connections with your ascendant as well. Another picture here as well. We've got a lot of the personal planets above the horizon. Not only is that Jupiter your chart ruler, but it also rules the 10th house. So again, being wonderfully exalted, yes, it's going to station to go retrograde, but maybe also a nice time in terms of being the greater benefic, ruling the 10th house, anything to do with career matters, things of that nature, those in higher echelons of society for a time will be quite helpful with that exalted Jupiter. Of course, we've got now Mercury making its way through angular. Anytime a planet becomes angular, becomes quite prominent. Here, Mercury, we're going to come through stationed to go retrograde and come back. So that might have a tie-in with both, partners because it's ruling the seventh house, but it might tie in with, public appearance as well, like you're doing, Chelsea, talking, being out in public. We've got the Mars picture up there as well, which is going to move over into the angular house, and also the sun this month highlighting the area of the ninth. So tying in those matters as well. And I really like your point talking about that Saturn, because I always wondered how for Pisces rising that's been working out. So whether that's been a sense of annoyance, saying that greater malefic is back in the whole sign first house, particularly if you're late degrees of Pisces rising. And I'm sure you guys are eventually just like, both you and Saturn and Neptune, please eventually just go away. Like,
Yes.
we've done this. It's the last check-in with Saturn. It's the last go around, but please get out of my angular first house and go off. Yes, eventually it might have to come into a financial conversation moving along, but I can see that being quite heavy with that Saturn for you guys. So, but on there, but I just love this wonderful Jupiter picture. What's quite interesting with the outer planet Uranus is that is again angular at this moment in time, but it's going to station to go back into Taurus. So third house matters might come back up, but you might have already got that taste already of that angular Uranus coming in, shaking up the home life in some way. I don't know, maybe you've switched jobs or positions and you're now working from home, things of that nature, anything that ties up a shake up of the home and family life. And I think, Chelsea, you've spoken to that Uranus picture before, I think.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, changes, all around, anything again, that anything that anytime an eclipse cycle becomes angular, it really does still bring in the 10th and the 4th because it squares everything, or the other way around, the 1st and the 7th if it's at the 10th and the 4th. So, yeah, it's all up for a change.
All for change. That's it. Use your
Yeah,
mutability.
yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for not only going through the every week of November, but going through all the rising signs. So now I'd like to ask you, what's going on with you? Can you tell us about your background, your practice, where people can find you, all of those fun topics?
Yeah, I can be found at chelseacollinsastrology.com and on Instagram at Chelsea Collins Astrology. I do have some reading offerings available there if anyone is interested. Otherwise, I continue to be a lifelong student of astrology. Love being on the show with you, and we have such a good time all the time. And yeah, just looking forward to how the end of the year is going to end up looking up.
Absolutely wonderful. And again, Chelsea, thank you so much. And for everybody watching, Chelsea's going to be back multiple times. Like I said at the beginning, a brilliant astrologer. And thank you so much for sharing your insights today. For everybody watching, to reiterate, I'll put the links to Chelsea's links both in the comment box and description boxes below here. But again, thank you so much. And I can't wait to have you back on the show
Thanks for
soon.
having me.
Cheers. Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you in the next
Bye.
one. Cheers.